Have you ever been hurt and decide you're just gonna give up on some working out for a little while, or you're feeling some pain and you just decide to back off and not do anything else? Well, that can have its problems. I'm Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, and I'm here to give you another challenging thought. And the fact that it's what you can do and not necessarily what you can't do. So if you're a runner and you hurt your knee, if you give up altogether, there's so many things that you're going to fall back on at the level of your fitness. And so there's so many other things that you could be doing to enhance your own body and can work on, say, your upper body, or you could, get on a bike or a stationary bike and be creative and try other ways of helping yourself. And you can use pain as a guide. At the same time, it depends what kind of pain it is. If you're just tight and it's feeling tension and you have to kind of gently work through that, that's one thing. And we talked about progressions in my other video. Feel free to go back to that video. But in this case, I want to talk about modifications. So when I talk about progressions in the other one, that's more along the lines of you're not necessarily feeling pain, you want to prevent pain, maybe do it smartly. But when you want to change things, like modify things, perhaps when you are injured acutely or suddenly pain comes on or it's persisting, there are ways that you can be creative and resourceful and actually help yourself still improve your fitness. And so I'm going to give you examples of some ways that I modify what I do based on how I'm feeling and what's going on in my life. So for instance, if I have a headache or a migraine, which I rarely get, but if I do, I'm not usually going to pick out, let's do some strength training today and increase the internal pressure. That would make me feel miserable, and I really don't have it in me to do. So tend to focus on doing more stretching and helping myself out with ways to improve other areas of my fitness, and also to calm the nervous system down in that way. If I injure, actually I have kind of a persistent issue with my left big toe, and I'll show you if I can do this. I've got people watching me, probably wondering what I'm doing, but this joint right here, leading up to the big toe, hopefully you could have seen that, but that big toe, because the big toe kind of turns in, I try to modify, make sure I have a big toe box in my shoes so it's not cramming my big toe and making me look like I have a bigger bunion or lead to more of a bunion problem. But that joint itself is pretty aggravated, and you could probably say it's arthritis. I've never had it imaged, but it's not red and inflamed, but it can get aggravated if I pound it really hard. Really suddenly. So I actually gently do some rotations of that toe to kind of, because the bone is a live tissue, and so from my understanding in medicine, I try to just prepare it a little bit and give it a little bit more mobility, and almost like I'm trying to mold it, and there's no evidence to that. That's my belief. And so I'm going to tell you, everything I say here is not tell you what to go do or that I have proof of a lot of things, but I try to be smart with it and modify what I'm doing. So if I'm going to do a push-up, most of the time your big toes are bent at a 90-degree angle. So if you imagine this your big toe and it's like this pushing on the ground while you're doing a push-up, then I don't have someone to hold the camera, so I can't show you. But if I'm doing a push-up, many times if I don't want to aggravate that joint, I will put that left foot above my right foot. So I'm really only holding my body up on the right foot, which doesn't have any susceptibilities like my left toe. And so I like to call it susceptibility because that pain kind of comes and goes, and depending on what I'm doing. So I do those push-ups that way, and so that way I don't aggravate that left toe when it's unnecessary. So, and then I'll shift things. A lot of the modifications I make are not necessarily just physical, it's also mental in the way that I'm thinking about using my body. So the more you use your body, the more awareness you'll have. It's kind of hard for people that don't get that, for them to get that. As you use your body more, your muscles develop more, your coordination develops more, you have a better sense of your body, even if you're not looking at it. And so when I'm maybe walking or jogging or taking a higher impact and working up into that, I modify, especially knowing my left leg tends to be a little bit weaker. If I was to do single leg type workouts or something, which I don't do very often, I find that my left side's always been weaker ever since my ACL surgery on my left knee. But I try to strike with my foot from on a more, I think about it and visualize that I'm putting more pressure into the left foot versus me favoring my right leg. So those are other modifications I do to kind of enhance my the way my foot hits the ground, so it's not all rolling into that, big toe. So I'm doing a lot of like internal things that are helping me modify, and it's not something people can see from the outside. And the other thing is, say, my left knee. So I told in a previous video I'd injured my left knee. I had hyperextended it, and actually it was because I wasn't following my own rules about progressing appropriately. And so I found myself modifying my activity. I was limping for 2 or 3 weeks, trying not to, but as I was finding myself using my legs in different ways, I was trying to be somewhat cautious, but not necessarily because I was fearful. It just was still a little bit inflamed. But as that started getting better, I started working on my strength of my legs in a very controlled fashion, and not necessarily running or doing those things. I actually modified my activity. I didn't go out and do any runs or anything like that. I didn't want to aggravate an already injured area. So what I found myself doing is going to the gym, and I would use machines to help me with certain activities, and I would do like quarter squats against the wall to kind of work on the quads, and general upper leg strength, and a little bit of the glutes. So I would work on the general strengthening, which helps my knee, and in the sense that you want some strong legs to manage different activities if you want to be more fit than just walking from your car to your house. So over the course of the year, I was starting to work in lateral motions, and I found that I'm very susceptible for shifting, which was probably the reason, who knows, that contributed to my ACL being torn. But I found a good way to work side to side. So I don't know if you can see, but I would do these, and don't mind my boots, but it's kind of wet out here. But you can see I would just do these little lateral motions so that it could tolerate that type of stressor. And it was feeling a little unstable when I first started trying to do that. And but I just progressed slowly. But like I said, I'm modifying my activities to deal with the injury appropriately and rehab myself. And there was other ways that I tried to strengthen my legs, and I would work into more squats and single leg squats with assistance of various modalities in the gym or at home. So that very much helped me. Other modifications that I've done in the past is the hip. So I'm not a big fan of people who are 20 or 30 years deconditioned and never worked out. I hate to say it, but the 50, 60-year-old woman that wants to get into Zumba, and nothing wrong with dancing if you're progressing yourself, but sometimes you have to modify your activity based on where you're starting. So just because you can do something doesn't mean you're not going to pay for it. So if you change up into something different, start low, go slow, always a good rule. But if you're starting to shake your hips and whip them out to the side and do it at high velocities, and you have not done any activity but straightforward walking to your car and back to your house, I made the mistake of going into a class, even though I was relatively fit. I wasn't used to doing a lot of quick shifting lateral motions, and so I ended up whipping my left hip to the side, and it felt, my perceptions, it felt like the left hip capsule. I felt something, a twinge, and then it's one spot that really aggravates me in certain spots depending on what I'm doing. And I noticed as I went downhill and any jogs later on, even a year later, that it was a little bit mad at me. But if I go uphill, it was fine. And so there were certain parts of it that were giving me problems. However, I found activities, I had to explore this for a while to figure out what it is that made it better. So I modified my activities so I didn't aggravate that, but I was still doing something. So most importantly, it's not what you can't do, it's what you can do, and you still need to do something. But if you still have a dilemma or a challenge or a pain, you still need to explore it. Of course, I'm in the medical field. I tend to do a lot of self-diagnosing, and not that I have to diagnose it. I just say, okay, does this hurt? Does it make it better? I don't need a specific diagnosis. This is not life-threatening. Sometimes I get someone that's knowledgeable too to kind of work through the problem with me and have some ideas to explore. But I found that there are certain activities that In fact, it's pretty surprising, but when I worked on my hip and my leg strengthening, I ended up doing some of these side bridges, and where I let my hips kind of fall down, and I'll see if I can do that. Let's see. Okay. So I don't think this is going to work, but when I'm up like this and I'm letting my hips dip and I come back up, I found that I was doing several sets of that, and I just felt like it was almost as if things were tightening along the side. And so, you know, I explored that, and it seemed to really give me a lot more confidence in moving my hips in different ways and with a little bit higher speed. So now I can, you know, dance, and I can do some other things, and I don't get that trigger of hip pain. So no injections, nothing crazy, no medications, but exploring kind of what maybe your body needs more of, whether it's strengthening or just using it more. Maybe a little bit of flexibility if it's a lot of tension and tightness. So those are some of the things I do. One other last thing is that this left shoulder is vulnerable or susceptible to pain, not necessarily just at the shoulder, but actually with numbness in my fingers. So right here, the first rib, some people have an extra rib and they call it cervical rib, but right here is where your brachial plexus, which is where all the nerves come out from the neck, and it rides right over the top of your first rib. So certain postural positions that if I am kind of slouchy, or I'm putting a heavy bag right here and it's pushing down on my shoulder, I'll start feeling tingling, and I typically feel it right here in these two fingers, the little finger and the ring finger, which is the ulnar nerve, majority of it. So the nerve roots that come out, the one that's the closest to the rib, theoretically, and the way it typically demonstrates, is the ulnar nerve, but there's multiple nerves can be irritated by the first rib. And so for me, I know whenever I'm getting weak and I lose a lot of my postural muscles or my shoulder girdle muscles and I'm getting weak, if I don't keep this area of my body strong, I get this repeated tingling in the fingers and some little bit of pain here, but mainly it's represented by this numbness in my fingers. So these are just things that I think through, that, you know, I kind of know what the cause and effect is a lot of times, but most importantly, if I'm having pain in other areas, I try to modify my activity maybe to prevent the pain. Sometimes it's a matter of just letting your body heal whatever that acute pain or injury was, and modifying the activity to do something else, and maybe doing cycling versus running, or working on more strengthening if you upper body, or if maybe someone's a shoulder injury and maybe they're a guy that's always working upper body and never working the bottom part of their body, then that's a perfect opportunity to work on those things in a safe way. Obviously, you don't want to re-injure another already problem. But so I just want to remind you to challenge your health before your health challenges you, and that you can see change within challenge, and that modifications are helping you continue to maintain some level of fitness so you don't get too far behind. And so I'm curious what your challenge is, what you want to change. Feel free to put it in the comments. I'd love to hear where you're from, especially from all over the world. That would be awesome. But I'd love to capture that in maybe another video in the future. And if you want to make sure you come back to this video later, you can share it with a friend. And that way you can find it on your Facebook feed that you had actually shared that, and you can find it. But if you haven't seen the beginning of this, feel free, it'll be on the timeline. You can go ahead and go back and re-watch that. So until next time, challenge your health before your health challenges you. Talk to you later.